I am Vinnie Tortorich. Folks, your good intentions have been stolen, but don't worry. I'm here to help you get them back. You may be soft and succulent at the beginning of this process, but hang in there. Before long, you will be lean and mean, guaranteed. Yeah, everything reminds me of song, and it's an inside joke between me and this guest, but I felt like we were flirting with disaster. And we won't even talk about why. But I'm going to be honest with you, folks, because hell, why stop being honest now? I recorded a podcast with this woman 3 days ago. And then when we were done, I felt like I did a horrible job. The crazy thing is, she wrote to me that night. She didn't say I did a horrible job, but she pretty much wanted to say that. I know it because I felt it. And I couldn't put that podcast out. So we decided, instead of flirting with disaster, how about do round 2? Folks, she's been on the show before. Her first book was Why We Swim. And when I saw the title, I thought that was the most ridiculous book I was going to ever read and couldn't get enough of it. So when she wrote me about her second book, let's see, it's right here, On Muscle, right there it is, On Muscle. Bonnie Tsui, she's been on the show once before. So folks, let's welcome her back by popular demand. And we're going to talk all about muscle today. Bonnie Tsui. Bonnie.
Woot, woot. Hi, Vinny.
This podcast could not come at a more, say, opportune, maybe apropos time in the history of this podcast. And let me explain to you why. When I wrote the book, Fitness Confidential, you know the story because we have the same book agent. Yes, they looked around and went, you don't exist on the internet. So I started a podcast, and the podcast went for almost 2 years before I ever put a book out. And the podcast became wildly, what would you say, popular, I guess. You know, it was the early days of podcasting. It was one of the first fitness podcasts, and we just got a great audience, a big audience, and people loved what I was talking about, but they got the wrong idea about me. They thought I was only about weight loss. It's like, oh, this guy's a weight loss specialist, right? Famously got a bunch of Hollywood actors, thin for roles, right? Changing their body image for a role. A lot of times when these actresses, Bonnie, they would have babies in between. You know, one of my main jobs, most people don't know this, but actresses who are in baby years, right? The years when they can have babies, they would plan pregnancies between movies. So when you finish shooting a movie, it takes a long time for them to edit it and do all the stuff and then put the movie out. And in that time, they would go, okay, I'm going to get pregnant, right? And have a baby. And then when the movie comes out, now they're obligated to go do all the red carpet stuff and go promote the movie and do everything else on Access Hollywood and whatever the thing was back then. But they didn't look the way they looked as the character because they got mommy weight on, right? They're breastfeeding and everything else. So somehow some agent in Hollywood over at William Morris Endeavor figured out, oh, wait, this guy Vinny is taking weight off of our client. You know, let's get him to start working with these mommy actresses to get them thin so they can look like they looked in the role. And that's where I got really popular in Hollywood amongst getting mommies thin. Right.
But you're saying that's not what you do.
That's not what I do, but that's what I became known for. What I do, and you and I talked about this more off the air, and it's exactly what your entire book is about, is, you know, muscle and how important muscle is to the body. Because I think we would both agree after reading your book, by the way, folks, you need to go get On Muscle right away. It's in the Vinnie Book Club because I've already read the book and you have to go get it. The thing about On Muscle is you make the audience realize that muscle is not just for show, right? When we think of muscle, we think vanity, right? But It's
We
more than
do.
that.
Yeah. We think about it as something that we look at rather than something that we use.
Right.
You know? And guess what? It is so much more than that. And yeah, let's talk about that.
Yeah. Well, look.
Um,
Well, go on. Go
no,
on.
no, go, Vinny, you have a
But
thought.
I mean, think about it. You know, why does a woman, when a woman chooses a man, right? Our lizard brain takes over, our caveman brain takes over. And she's going to go, okay, the one with the strong jaw, right? Think of what we look at as beauty in the world, chiseled good looks, right? I didn't make up that term, chiseled good looks. So
Right.
a woman looks for a guy, you know, you know, the protection, now protection means something else. Go find a nerd that can shoot me to the moon in a space capsule, right? Because now money is king, right? But there was a time in the world where women wanted to have the best protector. Oh, this guy can bring meat back to the cave. This guy can protect me from other animals and other cavemen. We looked at muscle a certain way back in the day, right? When we were Neanderthal or Neanderthal, as it's called. We put the H
Yeah,
on
Neanderthal. That's right.
Neanderthal and
Yeah, and now muscle means something different. I mean, muscle is, we've come a long way from the caveman days, which is generally a good thing. Wouldn't
yeah,
you agree?
I would.
And 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 it is interesting because even though we're leading increasingly virtual lives, um the our physical selves still communicate information, like you said, like what do we think when we see like wide shoulders, chiseled jaw, pecs, whatever, or that we see someone who reminds us of this kind of quintessential like superhero physique, right? And athleticism. We laud athletes. We are impressed by physicality, and that still has value, even though in these increasingly virtual lives we lead, they don't actually mean as much as they used to, right? When you actually had to use your body to go get food and go get sustenance and just do the basic things of survival. And yet, like, we still, like you said, our lizard brains are still kind of tuned into that. And so in terms of beauty, like, and what we find attractive, we are still like, those things do speak to us, but the meaning of muscle is changing, right? It communicates all kinds of things.
Well, and a lot of it, throughout my life, I walked into a gym when I was very young,
Hmm.
and I had no perception because I was prepubescent when I walked into a gym. I didn't have any thoughts about my own sexuality,
Hmm.
right? I mean, meaning I knew I was a boy, and you know that kind of thing. But I walked into a gym because I wanted to look like a superhero. That was
Right.
the bottom line. I wrote about it in
Yeah.
Fitness Confidential.
Right.
Uh, and the superhero I wanted to look like was Jack LaLanne, right?
Hmm.
Because, well, and it's funny now, but I was getting beat up on when I was a kid a lot because I had a
Mm-hmm.
speech impediment. I had other problems, So when you're getting beat up on and you watch cartoons and you see Superman, you know that
Hmm.
Superman is not real, right? You know that the Incredible Hulk is not real.
Right.
But when you turn the television on and you see Jack LaLanne on the in his onesie, the guy made the onesie famous, right? Back in
Yes,
the
he did.
50s and
Yeah.
60s. Here we are in the 70s, and I'm looking at Jack LaLanne on television, and I'm realizing something very, very important. He's not Superman, and he's not the Incredible Hulk. He's an actual human being, and
Hmm.
he's what's attainable. In my
Right.
small brain, he was attainable. He had a vein running through his bicep,
Hmm.
and I equated that with strength, right?
Mm.
But think about it, a small young brain. This guy
Hmm.
doesn't have any subcutaneous fat on his biceps so you can actually see veins.
Right.
That
Right.
that became something. What I
Mm-hmm.
didn't realize was when I started putting on muscle and when I started being, when I did become sexualized, right? When you become
Mm-hmm.
13, you go through
Sure.
puberty,
Yeah, you hit puberty.
and all of a sudden you're looking at girls in a different light, right?
Yeah.
And girls are looking at you in a different light, and then boys are now calling you an asshole. The same guys that were beating up on you, you're now an asshole. And you do realize when you go to the beach, people look at the kid with the chest and the abs.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, he's an asshole. Screw that guy,
Hmm.
right?
Because he's
So
competition. Is that what it was?
it is,
That it
but you
turned
don't
into?
understand
Yeah.
that when you're a kid because I was a nerd.
Hmm.
After other kids got to know me, people that did know me, they would go, "Oh, I had the wrong impression." They would tell me this. I had the wrong impression of you. I thought you were a jerk. Why? Because you look the way you look.
Hmm. Well, and then it's interesting because what you just said about a nerd and you looking the way you look, meaning after you started lifting weights and working out and being very fit, that there's that dichotomy, right, between the brain and body, in that brains and brawn, like there's been this for a really long time, culturally speaking, there's the brain and muscles are seen in opposition, right? That dumb jocks and smart nerds, and that's for some reason, um, you can't be both. And so I think again, we've evolved beyond that now, but there is still this funny association with muscles as being dumb when when they're actually really smart, like they have their own intelligence. And you and I know this, we've talked about this a lot, just how muscles are always, talking to our brains, right? They're doing all kinds of things for our bodies, um and keeping them healthy and keeping our brains healthy, right? So when you actually exercise and lift weights and your muscles get stronger, they are doing all kinds of things biochemically, and sending messages to your brain that your bulks up your brain, right? So that when you bulk up your muscles, you bulk up your brain. And actually, cognitively speaking, you need to be lifting weights and strength training and exercising into your later life in order to keep your brain in good working order, right? So, and it's something that I still think is I think more people are starting to understand that, because that's the sort of public health message that's going out there. But it is, you're kind of working and you're working against a long-standing division between brains and body and brains and muscle that we still kind of have in this society.
Well, look, I mean, I've been yelling on this podcast ever since we started this Maha movement, right?
Mm,
I've said,
mhm.
hey, whoever, RFK Jr., whoever, invite me in
Mm.
and let me become the czar of PE, right? To bring
I would
PE back.
love that. We need
His,
you, Vinny.
his uncle, I don't want a dime. I live 2 hours away from DC. I'll do it for absolutely free. I don't want a dime from this country to do it. But his uncle, JFK, enacted the presidential physical fitness program, right? When
Mhm.
I was a kid, it was not an option. Every kid had to go through this program every
Yeah,
year
me too.
in
Yeah.
PE. So you're 12 years younger than me or 14 years younger than me, and you were still doing it. Their
Yeah.
kids now, I've told this story on the show several times. In Calabasas, California, very wealthy community. I had an actress that did not like to work out. But the only thing I could get her to do besides working on her diet is walk, jog around the track because the track was flat. So
Mhm.
we would go to Calabasas High School, and when we get there, we'd be walking, jogging. We would walk the curves, jog the straights. That was all I could get this one. She had a weight problem and what have you. The PE classes, the bell would ring. The PE class would come out, mosey out to the field. No one was dressed in a PE uniform. Period. No one. End of story. They all just sat around the infield of one of these really nice turf fields.
Mm.
There were soccer nets set up on each side because it was a
Mhm.
football/soccer field/track. Not one ball was rolled out. And there were two PE teachers, a male and a female. And while the kids just sat on the track, the coaches would walk around the track like me and my clients, twirling their whistles around their fingers and
Right.
just chit-chatting and what have you. And I'm like, these teachers are not even trying. So one day I had enough. And I walked up to the couple and I said, "You're the PE teachers, right?" And they said, "Yeah." It's like, excuse me for even asking. And I know this is embarrassing, but why aren't you motivating those kids to do anything? And the female sparked up first and she said, every single one of them have a note not to take PE. There's nothing we can do. All of these rich kids get their parents to write notes and there's no PE. It's the biggest disgrace, the biggest
That's
disgrace.
really sad. It's really and it's terrible. I mean, I don't even know what to say to that. It's like, I mean, I think it's one thing if you get wavered out because you play a sport, right? Maybe you
Right.
wanna, but it's a waste of time to have these kids sitting there, not doing anything.
But look, I mean, there was waivers when I played sports, but none of
Mhm.
us took the waiver,
Yeah.
right? This is another chance to go do something. Absolutely. Right. But it's a different world now where they're trying not to do something. I've had experts come on this show and say the biggest thing we're doing to kids is we're not giving them recess and we're not giving them
Right.
PE. Right.
Yeah, because kids, kids in school do better with PE. It's not just kind of running around and settling their bodies and calming them down, although that's a big part of it. It's that to actually run around and exercise. I mean, all of these changes are happening to your body the second you start moving, and um it's not it's not uh an accident that running around and moving your body and exercising makes you feel good.
Right.
It's not an accident evolutionarily that is something that also benefits your brain and, helps your hippocampus, learning and memory centers, like, get bigger. I mean, this is like a whole body, whole health, whole human, whole person, goodness. And why wouldn't you want to take advantage of that pharmacy in your muscles, right? That's what the Stanford health psychologist Kelly McGonigal calls it. And I'm like, yes, tap into that pharmacy in your muscles every day. Why would you not do that? Uh, and yeah, like I just think that is something that we need to be teaching our kids, and we need to be leading by example, right?
And by the way, the Greeks knew this way back when, right? I
Yeah,
mean,
yeah.
they started the original Olympics, and when you think about any of it, right? And you look at all the
Hmm.
Greek statues, and if you go through, the Uffizi and Florence and the Borghese, and you look at these statues, and you go anywhere around Italy, and in your book, you go to the Sistine Chapel, you
Right.
run ahead, like someone told you, get there early in the morning, and then when they open
Yes.
the gates, run through the gates, and you get there and you lay on the floor and you look up at what Michelangelo never wanted to do. By the way, did you know that?
Yeah. It was not, yeah, he
Yeah.
didn't wanna spend all those years of his life getting a crick in his neck, and he actually wrote sonnets about it, how much it
Well, you know
messed
what
up his
happened, right?
body
It
to
was
do it.
politics. It was all did you know that?
Yeah.
It
Yeah.
was it
Yeah.
was a pope that he was a sculptor, and there was a
Mhm.
pope that didn't like him and liked another sculptor instead, and he said, "Hey, you're not doing this anymore, but since we have you anyway, go paint."
Well, and then I mean, the amazing thing with Michelangelo, is that he was, even at the time, um, when people saw his paintings and sketches, they were like, it was almost scandalous how human and robust and glowing his figures were, because he, like Da Vinci, two of the greatest Renaissance artists of the human figure, they based their art on anatomy, understanding. They learned how the body worked. They did dissections, they observed that, and they understood how, anatomy is the study. You understand how the body goes together by examining its parts, and that's how you kind of understand the whole. And that's where their fundamental knowledge came from. And then they just kind of took that knowledge, and you just see their art and you're just blown away because they understood how the body worked, and then they were able to kind of communicate um the muscularity and the light and the life, and I still, when you were talking about, you were reminding me of the story of this, where I first went to the Sistine Chapel and ran through with my roommate Melissa, and then we just got there and we were the only first ones in the chapel for the day. We lay down on the floor, or I lay down on the floor, and I just I get shivers up my neck
Yeah.
thinking about it, because it was like this it's not just that art, but it's also this connection through over time of understanding this beauty and understanding this radiance. And obviously the church authorities wanted him to be doing this art because this was considered essential religious education, right? To get people who didn't know how to read into a church to
Right.
understand the stories of religious figures. But there was also something else there, which is that it was so palpably human, and we are all that. And I think you cannot look at those figures and not feel that magic, and also my dad, from our conversations, that he was an artist, and the martial artist, and the physical, talk about physical education, right? Childhood physical education. He was that person who led my childhood through
Your
that.
dad was he was a big Bruce Lee guy, right?
Yeah, he was. He actually
Yeah.
went to the same high school in Hong Kong as Bruce Lee did a few years after.
Yeah. And even as a young kid watching Bruce Lee in those early movies, he was one of my early heroes because his body just seemed so improbable, is the only it's like I'm looking at it going, how's that even possible to look the way he looks,
What do
right?
you mean? Because he was so
He was so muscular, and
lean and muscular? Yeah.
he was lean, and that's I've always been a fan of not just big giant. We have the golden era
Right.
bodybuilders. Now we have these super freak bodybuilders and all this stuff.
Mhm. Mhm.
I've always been a fan of people like Steve Reeves, right?
Mhm.
Or Reg Parks, where the before the steroid guys, right?
Right, right, right.
Vince Ronda, um, uh, Bruce Lee,
Mhm. That
right?
wiry, functionally strong body, right?
Right. Because it looks like something that could be used. It's a
Yeah.
usable weapon
Yeah.
versus this freakish looking, bodybuilder, muscle for muscle's sake.
Right.
Best example, and this is going to make me seem weird that this guy's a basement dweller. Uh, but I've been a Stallone fan from the original Rocky. And
Why
if
is
you
that
saw,
weird?
huh?
Why is that weird?
Well, it's going to get weird. Hang on.
Okay. I'm
It's not
waiting. I'm
weird
ready.
that body. So if you look at Rocky One, like
Mhm.
the original, it's not Rocky One, it's Rocky.
Mhm.
He's got a good build, but he's smooth in that
Mhm.
movie. He looks like a boxer in Rocky, right? He's kind of smooth and he's got some muscle. He's small. So he's who he is. It's like they were showing you the life of like Rocky Marciano Graciano, one of the famous Rockies, right? Where they could take a punch and then just come back, right? Okay, I get what it was, but you're seeing this body in motion. And then you get to Rocky 2, and he looks less like a boxer, right?
Mhm.
He's more cut.
Mhm.
He's worked
Mhm.
out more. And now, as a human being, he's got more money, so he can spend more time in the gym and he can get the right kind of help. And then he comes out with Rambo. So you have the
Uh-huh.
first Rambo, and he's now more ripped. than he was in either of the Rockies,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
Which is now you're looking at him going through his transformation. He's becoming like Bruce Lee. His
Mm.
muscles have muscles. His skin is so thin you can almost see the mitochondria swimming beneath the skin, right? Right. So he's becoming this superhuman thing. And then I think Franco Columbu, the famous bodybuilder, trained him for the second Rambo,
Mm.
where
Mm-hmm.
now he's really getting ripped out. Like in the there's a term in the industry, I'll tell you off the air, but he's getting
Okay.
really ripped out. And I think the third Rocky comes around that same time, or it might
Mm.
be the
Mm-hmm.
Rocky where he's going against Drago, which is the fourth Rocky.
Okay.
And he's doing those two movies simultaneously, so it's the same body. He doesn't look
Right.
anything like a body like a boxer anymore, right?
Right.
He's and they make reference to it in the movie. The announcer, when he gets in the ring, goes, he's really lean and thin. He doesn't really look like a boxer. They had to make
They
note of
had to say that. Yeah.
it, right? Because boxers are kind of smooth, right? Like Muhammad Ali was kind of smooth. Muhammad Ali was a great boxer.
Mm-hmm.
George Foreman, great boxer. They did not look like Bruce Lee, right?
Yeah.
Bruce Lee was other humanly, right?
Mm.
Think about that.
Mm-hmm.
And when you
But it's
think about,
also like, but it's also what his body was like. I mean, it was just his body type too, right? Of course. Like I think
right,
Stallone and Bruce Lee did not start from the same place
well, they did,
physiologically. So it would be interesting, to kind of understand what Stallone had to go through to get to that point, right? I mean, which is what you're saying, that he kind of went through this transformation of himself.
and I think they both did because Bruce Lee used to talk about doing sit ups and working out in between writing movies. Like he's writing and he would get on
Mm,
the floor.
yeah, yeah.
And I personally picked up some of that. I'm sitting in a gym, as you know,
Right,
right?
right.
There's a squat rack right there. There's machinery over here. There's machinery all around me.
Yeah. That's
And
what my dad does. He was an artist, professional artist, so he would like his studio was both the art studio and the gym, and so he would paint. He would like work on, some commission. And then in between painting sessions, he would like, do a round on the speed bag or lift some weights or jump rope or whatever. And I feel like that is a diet of a practice of exercise that I kind of internalized, and it's something that you do. And it's almost like it is built into the everyday. If you build it into your landscape, right?
right,
It makes it
yeah,
part of
yeah,
it.
but it really is strange how muscle means so much, and it's so different to so many different people, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And especially in this day and age where people are like, "Hey, I'm fat and I'm proud."
Mm.
Okay, there's nothing, when you're fat, you're not as healthy as you can be. And if you're morbidly obese, now the word morbid comes into your title, right? So
Right.
any comorbidity will now take you out, right? And we saw
Mhm.
that during COVID.
Oh,
They
yes.
didn't want to admit this on television at the time, but now we know most of the people, and folks, don't write to me, I get it. Someone who was lean and thin died in your family. I'm sorry. But the majority of the people who died during COVID were elderly because they're comorbidities, right? There are
Mhm.
other things mixed in there. And
Sure.
then the other people who died were people who were morbidly obese, which is very, very sad. And it didn't have to be that way, right?
I guess what you're saying is those were preventable deaths.
In a lot of
And
cases, look, COVID took a lot of lean people out too. But
yeah, for sure.
when
Yeah.
you look at when you look at the overall record, it was mainly older people and people who had comorbidities. And when you
Right.
have morbid in your title, that's not a good thing. I want to take a quick break here and I want to get into not muscle so much as how to use the muscles and strength and what that means. And your book really goes in depth. And I love where you went with that, with Jan Todd and just the whole thing. So we're going to get into that in a second. Folks, purevitaminclub.com is where you want to go for all of your vitamin needs. Listen, I started this company from scratch, and I did it because after I had cancer back in '07, I started reading every label of everything that went into my body. And the first thing that stuck out to me was something called titanium dioxide. And when you look at titanium dioxide, even in nanoparticles, it will cause colon cancer. That's right. The thing you're taking for your health has something that can cause colon cancer. My favorite one was magnesium stearate, which blocks the absorption of other nutrients. So the nutrients you're taking are being blocked by something that's put in the vitamins. That's why when you take their vitamins, you see a really bright kind of urine whenever, because most of it is just being shuffled right out of your body. Not at purevitaminclub.com. By the way, it's getting hot out there. Our world famous, and I do mean world famous, Ultra Salt is the number one electrolytes. I have water. If you're watching this on video, I have my 40-ounce water bottle right here. There's 3 Ultra Salts in here. That's right. I just break them open them up, put them in my water. Just drinking water alone won't keep you hydrated the way taking water with electrolytes will. So go to purevitaminclub.com. The best vitamins on the planet at the lowest price. We're talking to two-time author Bonnie Tsui. And Bonnie, you went in directions that I didn't think you would go into. We both have a love of strong people. By the
Mm.
way, the great Arnold Schwarzenegger and his lifting partner at the time, the aforementioned Franco Columbu, they were strength guys back in Europe before they came to the United States. They weren't interested in bodybuilding. They were interested in being as strong as they can be by lifting heavy things. And to do that, you have to go to certain places in the world, and you looked into that. What did you find?
I mean, once you start looking into the history of lifting heavy objects as a, sign of manhood across geographies and time, it's like pretty widespread, right? And I guess, demonstrating physical strength, demonstrating, a show of strength in the public eye across human history has been linked to it's hysterical. It has been uh, more often than not a man's dominion, right? And so it's a sign of, like, for example, in Iceland, if you could lift, a heavy object, that you would get a bigger share of the catch if you were on a fishing vessel. And it's just so fascinating to kind of see, from Scotland with all of these stones of strength to India to Japan, there are these like lifting stones called chikaraishi. And sometimes it was like spiritual, it was meant to be something that everyone could do. um and it's just it's very atavistic. It's like something that we have done for a long time, and even now it's something that we still do, and we still are amazed when we see it happen. um and I wanted to tell the story of Jan Todd. She was the first woman to lift the Dinnie Stones, which are these stones of strength in Scotland that are pretty, probably the most famous of them. And she was the first woman to lift them back in the 70s. And she
Explain
became,
how heavy the Dinnie Stone is and how people lift the Dinnie Stone.
they are two stones. Combined weight is about 733 pounds. And they have these rings, these iron rings attached to them, because at first they were used for as like counterweights in like bridge construction, or to like tie your horses up to it at this, like, outside of this inn in Scotland. And then people started trying to lift them. And when Jan Todd made the pilgrimage to Scotland to try to lift them, I mean, it was just weird at that time, right? That a woman would go and do this. And at that time, she was a world record holding power lifter. weightlifter. She was the first, she won the first female powerlifting championships, and she was just, and then now I just want to kind of give our listeners a sense of who this woman is. She is a person who designs the events for the, Arnold strongwoman competitions at the Arnold Sports Festival. She is an academic, like a sports historian, strength sports. She is a very respected figure in strength sports. And at that time, she was lauded in Sports Illustrated as the world's strongest woman, And when she went to pick up those stones, it's interesting because, what you ask the question of what significance, these stones of strength, these manhood stones have if a woman can lift them. And that's something, that's disruptive. And it kind of makes people sit up and say, like, well, if she can do it, can I do it? And it opened up all these questions that sort of like, she was talking about how when she started, even just like when she started lifting weights or like doing any kind of exercise, she was like, that was before Title IX. And then after me, like people just started asking questions of like, well, what more are women capable of? She said, in this time, in these decades since she did that, she's talking about how like it used to be that, women were seen as being like 1/3 as strong as men, and then like 1/2 as strong as men. Is sort of like, well, actually, like amazing things are happening every day with women's sports and especially with like powerlifting and weightlifting and doing feats of strength, because women have only really been doing it for like a matter of decades. And so I think it's, her story is just so fantastic because she was so immersed in that world and she has all these amazing stories to tell.
Look, I remember back in high school, and I went to high school in the late 70s. I graduated in 81. So it wasn't that long ago. And you got to remember, I was in a deep, deep, deep South, right? And now, we see programs called Friday Night Lights. I grew up under the kind of Friday Night Light law of the South. Everything was football, and football ruled. And I remember, because the girls are more Southern Belle-ish down there, where they wouldn't want to run track because it would make, it would give them muscles in their legs. Now women are trying to get muscles in their legs. And, half the phone calls I take every day is, how do I get muscles in my, I want to have muscles like these people on Instagram. It's like, back then it was like, wait, you're starting to, you can see that sartorius muscle popping out. We can, I don't know, that hamstring. I always looked at it and went, oh my God, I want to date that girl. Look at those hamstrings. Right? It's always been that, and calf muscles were always sexy to me. But
yes,
calf
muscles are very sexy.
Yeah, they're sexy on men and women. But you would look and go, she's, there were girls that were on the cheerleading squad that quit cheerleading because they were getting too muscular from all the, because our cheerleaders have to do acrobatics and everything.
I know, and it's so weird because you can't do that kind of stuff without having muscles. It's sort of like, we got to understand the basics.
And then the Southern Belles couldn't understand why the football players were looking at those girls. And in their minds, it was because of their proximity to the football team. Well, in fact, we never really saw them because we didn't practice next to them. It's not like when you see a movie where the girls are cheering on the side of the practice field. They were in a whole different area. We never saw them, right? And on game night, you're not paying attention to the cheerleaders because your head is in a game, right? But after the game, you would look around and go, wait a minute, Cindy over there was pretty cute, right?
Look at her calves.
Yeah, look at Cindy's calves. They rival mine.
You know what? That reminds me of this great, like during the Paris Olympics, that Kevin Durant went to watch Simone Biles the way everyone went to watch Simone Biles.
Yeah.
And afterwards he was like, man, I wish I had calves like Simone Biles. I just love that that like cross discipline, cross athlete, like mutual admiration that happens, where you're just like, because their bodies are so different. And I think what's so amazing about, you and I have talked about wild world of sports and just the
Yeah.
Olympics, and just how getting to see all of the different permutations of the human body
Yeah.
excelling at physical things is just so awesome. Um, and I love that. I loved being schooled in that, as a kid.
Yeah, and we didn't get into your father yet, but your father, you and your brother, your dad would say, "Make a muscle, show me your muscles,"
Yeah,
right? So
yeah,
that was a
yeah.
big deal from your childhood. So your dad maybe looked at Bruce Lee the way I looked at Bruce Lee and went, "I need to do a
Mhm,
home gym here and work out." And then he has two kids, and he's telling the girl as well as the boy, "Show me your
mhm.
muscles. Now show me what you could do with those muscles." And
Yeah,
you were working out alongside your dad. I mean, you famously
yeah.
became a really good swimmer. You still do surfing, and what else do you do?
Mhm.
You're doing everything, right? You're doing
Well,
double jump rope. I mean, the book goes all over the place.
I'm surfing and swimming still and lifting weights, and I'm doing all these things, jumping rope. I just feel like to live a life of physicality was something that was instilled in me from a young age, right? And I didn't think about it really until I started writing this book. Because after a while we swim, I wanted to write a book, and kind of going back to COVID, like I started writing this book in 2021 when you couldn't do anything. You could
Right.
not go and see people, and for me as a writer and a journalist, like that's like my favorite thing, is to go out into the world and spend time with people and get to know them and see these characters and just understand their lives. And my dad now lives in China. He's been there for a long time after my parents split up. And I grew up in New York. We grew up in New York. And so then he moved back to Hong Kong and then on to China, mainland China. And I did not know when I was going to see him again. China was the first place to shut down, the last place to open up again. And we always had this bond that was like, I think a lot of us probably feel this way about our parents. But I especially do with my dad, where he's not great on the phone. He doesn't text, he doesn't write, he doesn't like video chatting or whatever. And so when we see each other, it's in person and in front of one another and doing things like, you know, working on the speed bag, working with the heavy bag, or doing some jump rope or whatever, just like taking walks, like he's showing me physically the things that he's doing, or like doing art together. And I did not know when the next time I was going to see him again. And so when I started thinking about like what's this book that I would do, a book about muscle, in a lot of ways it was not in that small part to have something to talk to him about, and to
Right.
feel connected to these stories that I grew up with, this life I had with him before my parents split up, and yet has had such a huge influence on like how I think about myself and my body in the world. And that really, upon reflection, has been such an undercurrent, a through line in everything I do, even in my journalism. And so, to think about this book, what I could write about muscle, it's the scientific, it's the cultural, it's the literary, it's the art, it's this personal through line, but it's also exploring all these different kinds of people who have connections to their bodies muscularly, and all these ideas of what muscle is. Obviously, first and foremost, strength comes to mind, but also like form, having like perfect form, like action, being a person of action. What does that mean? Flexibility, like when we say, it's a stretch, we're still trying. Like that is, we're talking about muscle, but we're also talking about like our character, like, and then endurance, like to endure, to grit through, to like muscle through. Like these are like our language gives us away. It's so fantastic. And I just thought there's so much to unpack there with muscle, not just what the tangible stuff of it and why it's good for us to have it and to maintain it and to build it and to figure out how to live into later life with strong muscles. But it's also like, what does it mean to us as people? There's a lot that's really rich, and I had a really wonderful time figuring it out.
Yeah. Hang on just a second. I got to do this to pay the bills, folks. Villa Capelli olive oil. Villa Capelli, longest running sponsor of this show. Go to Villa Capelli right now. I can tell you when this comes out, they may still be out of stock. We keep them out of stock here in the United States. They cannot ship here fast enough. That's how good the stuff is. Villa Capelli won't cut your oil or do anything else. When their trees are not producing, when they can't crush, you can't get olive oil. But if you want the good stuff, put your name on the Villa Capelli list. When the oil is back in stock, you'll be the first to know. And I tell everyone, I buy 2 3-liter tins at a time. And people go, Jesus Christ, man, that's 6 liters if you do the math. That's got to be a couple of $100. Yes, it is. But think about how long 6 liters of olive oil, that's almost 2 gallons. It's about 1.5 gallons when you do the math. That's going to last a long time. So Villa Capelli, get the good stuff. Villa Capelli, let them know we sent you. Put in the promo code Vinnie, Vinnie, save 10% every single time. We're talking to Bonnie Tsui. Bonnie, you brought up several things just now in that soliloquy, and I want to touch on a few of them. COVID. You know, I still do daily phone calls. People can book a consult with me and call and talk to me. And I do it 5 days a week, and I talk to several people a day. I love doing it. It's how I stay in touch. And one of the things I still hear, and we're talking 2025, I know NSNG works. I know low carb works. I've lost 100 pounds following you. I've done this. I've done that. But ever since COVID, I've gone off the rails. Ever since COVID, my life changed. On and on and on, right? So I get to hear this over and over and over again. And I think about it when I hang up with these people because my job is to help them get back on track. I think back to COVID. So we had just moved from California to Virginia by just a few months. We did not have our permanent house yet. We were living in a small house that I bought that's right on UVA's campus. You know, we used it as an investment property. You know, it was an Airbnb. Now I was living in my Airbnb while we found a house. Well, COVID hits right in the middle of that. I went to the gym the next day and there was a sign saying closed. When are you going to open again? We don't know, right? We're closed. You can't come in. So I looked around and went, this might not be good. So since all of my stuff was in storage, I found a guy on Facebook Marketplace. I don't even know how to go to Facebook Marketplace. My wife did. And I found an old York barbell set. And I went over to Tractor Supply Company and bought a horse stall mat so I could have a place to drop my weights without cracking my floor. That's all I had. I had a barbell and I had a mat that was meant for a horse's stall. That was my workout arena. And I said, okay, I'm going back. I'm going to call it my prison workout. I worked out in a little breezeway that could just fit the bar. But it meant something to me to go in there every day and do push-ups, do shoulder press, do deadlifts. I couldn't even really do squats because I didn't have a rack, right? I could only do what I could do. I eventually bought a bench, right? Facebook Marketplace. This guy was closing his gym because he couldn't make it through. I bought a bench from him. So now I had a bench. But here's the thing. This is when you know that you really, where there's a will, there's a way. They were working on a church right outside of the campus. They were building some kind of religious facility of sorts. And the guy had a backhoe. He was working the backhoe every day. And if you know, the backhoe has the big, thing, and there's prongs on the front of it. And every morning I would wake up and I would walk past the guy working the backhoe. And on day 3, I stopped and I flagged him down. He goes, yeah, what's up? I said, can you do me a favor? He goes, yeah, what do you need? I said, when you're done today, can you swoop that bucket in and leave it about 6-7 feet off the ground? And he goes, sure I can, but why? I said, because I'm going to run by and do some pull-ups. I'm going to grab because
and pull them. Yeah.
Pull-ups. And I had that for the next couple of weeks, and a guy remembered to do it every day. And then I would wave to him when I would walk by, and I would do this to remind him, leave it up. When you're done, leave that basket up. I'm going to need it. and I would do my pull-ups. I would sneak back out there every afternoon.
Right.
It's 2 blocks from my house, and do my pull-ups
That's
until
great.
that machine was gone. And then I called Amazon and got one of those pull-up bars you can hang in a door. You see,
Yep.
the point is, everyone else was going, COVID came and I started drinking and eating. I've had people tell me they became alcoholics during COVID. They never thought about alcohol before. They became alcoholics. I'm not better than those people. I'm just saying that some people thought about it for a minute and went, this might go on for a while. What can I do? What can I do today for my sanity?
Mhm.
Right.
Right.
And that's what
Yeah.
I did. What did you do during COVID? You had to do something because you're active, right?
I did a lot of burpees, and the kids learned how to do really great burpees. I mean, those kids were 7 and 9 when it
Yeah.
started, and by the end, I mean, now they're 12 and 14. They are, uh, they're great. They can each do burpees, no problem. Like, that was the we did a lot of running around that.
So
But
like
I
the
also, um I was able to surf. I was really lucky. I could
yeah,
swim and surf in the ocean. I live, you know, like if there's no traffic, I live 30 minutes, a little less from the beach, and I would do that. And I could also swim in San Francisco Bay. So I was doing that, and a lot of my master's swimming friends, who had never swum in open water before, started swimming with
yeah,
me out there. It was great. And I think people learned what they were capable of in that time, in all of the ways, good and bad. And I think on the sort of, it obviously was so difficult in so many ways, but from the silver lining perspective, I saw people doing things and figuring them out, like you said. I mean, you can kind of figure out how ingenious humanity is. And also like what was important, kind of distilling down, right? So we did
yeah.
a lot of um like running around outside and water stuff outside and burpees inside and like figuring out what to do with the kids and jumping rope, and doing all of these things that we figured it out. We figured it out because it was important to us. And we were lucky enough to be able to do that.
Yeah, I even I learned a whole new sport during. I bought a Concept 2 rowing machine.
So you were erging.
Yeah,
You were erging.
and my wife, because I'm a luddite when it comes to computer stuff. She she put a thing in a computer, and
Mhm.
every day, from the PM5, it logged
Mhm.
into the Concept 2
Mhm.
on my computer, right?
Yeah.
Magically, that synced up every day.
Yeah.
And so one day I was looking at it, like I finally went to it and I went, oh, let me see what's doing here. And I
Mhm.
get to the page and it says that you've now gone like, you know, 750,000 meters. And I'm sitting there going,
Wow.
that's close to 1,000,000. And then I had to learn. So I actually I had to call Concept 2. So I called them, I said, what does this mean? And they were like, well, it means something to get 1,000,000 meters in a fiscal year. And I said, a fiscal year, meaning not January to January. So you start at some other time. And they said, yeah, May 1st. And I had
Huh.
gotten my machine in at the end of July. So I had missed a couple of months when I had started. And I'm
Right.
looking around going, okay, it's coming up on March. And I want to get to 1,000,000 meters before I get to that fiscal year. And that
Wow.
was my first thing with rowing. And then I
Yeah.
got to 2,000,000 meters, and then it became a thing. Every year I got to do 1,000,000 meters.
Wow.
I mean, that machine has like 7,000,000 meters on it now. But at some point, I was like, wait a minute, because I call all indoor, aerobic equipment
Mhm.
masturbation, right? Because we're not actually rowing. We're
Yeah.
we're we're pretending to row, right? And
You're simulating.
I'm not actually cycling. I'm on a
Right.
spinner. I call it all, exercise masturbation, right? Because we're
Uh-huh.
pretending to do the thing, right?
Right. Right.
And I went, I'm done masturbating on this damn machine. And there's a rowing club 5 minutes from my house,
Oh
right?
my gosh. Really?
Yeah, I live in the coolest place ever. So I went there the year before, but it turns out
Mm.
that the class that they give for seniors, I'm a senior, happened
Mm.
right when I was going off to climb Mount Whitney, and I was going to miss
Mhm.
2 weeks out
Mhm.
of it. But the very next year, I was the first guy in line, right?
Oh, that is
And I learned
awesome.
how to row. I mean, and I go out and now you get to take the boats out. There's these beautiful sculls, and I'm sculling around like I know what I'm doing. They've asked me to be on the Masters thing. I don't want to be on the Masters.
Wow.
And they said, "Well, why don't you want to race?" And I was like, "Because I like the art of doing this."
Mhm.
Right?
Mhm.
I think they look at me and go, I bet he can go fast because I'll look like I can go fast.
And can you? But you can though.
I can kind of go fast. I, I don't want rowing to become, I don't want it to become, I have to go now train to be the
Yeah.
best
Yeah.
because that's
Well,
where
that
my
you
brain goes.
yeah. You know that
Right.
I rode in college?
Yeah, I do. You said that in the book or you told me that. I think it was in the book.
It was in yeah, well, I guess it was in on Muscle, but it was also in Why We Swim because it
Yeah.
was like the first time um I was like I'd swum my whole life until college and I thought, I want to try what is it like to be on top of the water in a
Yeah.
sport. And erging was like the hardest freaking thing that I'd done to date. I just thought like to do that in a gym, just be inside doing that was just so painful because you don't even get to be on the water.
Yeah.
You gotta make your splits, your whatever, however many minutes would be for like 500 meters time, and you have to stay on that stroke rate that's like under 22. You can't be too fast, but you still got to get enough speed, power off your legs that you're getting the time for that 500-meter split. And I just was like, but you know what? It's still in my head, right? Because I know what it is. I know what I want to be doing. And actually now when I go train, the other day I was training I went after our conversation, I went to train in the gym.
Hmm.
And one of the sort of conditioning things we're doing but in between sets of weights was erging. And I just thought, I kind of love hate it because I know I can be good at it. Because after, I was like, I became a pretty good rower. I had a really good technique, and then I just couldn't get big enough. I couldn't stay, I couldn't maintain enough muscle. Couldn't get
Well, yeah, those rowing girls, like especially like on the sweep rows, like one of the girls that taught my class,
mm,
very sweet woman named Riley. She was on the Duke rowing team. She's from here,
mhm,
but she rowed for
mhm,
Duke. But she came
mhm,
back home in the summer. Her job was being the head coach of this thing.
mhm.
And Riley, she's in the engine room on a sweep boat, meaning those, as you know, those 3 or 4 positions in the middle, right? The ones that
Right.
are, and she looks like a Hungarian strong girl. Like, I'm telling you, she's a power lifter.
Yeah.
Like, if you looked at this woman and said, what does she do? Right. And
Mm,
by the way, she's sexy in this big, powerful body, kind of like a
mhm,
Jan Todd type when she was in
mhm,
competition, right? Just this
mhm,
big, strong woman, right? And you're
mhm.
looking at that going, oh, she's at the pinnacle of what she does. She's tall and she's
Yeah.
big. And like I said, if you told me she was an Olympic
Amazing. Yeah.
lifter, I would go, yeah. And now she's in her 5th season, but she finished college, so she's doing grad school at UVA. I was out in my kayak a few weeks ago, and I
Yeah.
saw they were coming in from a scrimmage meet. Like a couple of the Ivy League schools came, and I'm out there. I'm like, who's out there? And I'll look in the UVA boat, and then the third position is Riley, right?
Woo!
And the reason I saw it is because I'm in my kayak and someone goes, Vinnie. And I'm like, really? Some hot rowboat? And then I looked at it, oh, it's my coach.
It's Riley.
It's Riley. but you know, I learned something new that came because of COVID. I would at 62, I would never be on the water.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
There
but
I
how
was.
cool is that? Yeah. And
it's very cool.
And I think there's an opportunity, to your point, as we get older. Well, I mean, I think just sort of like as you get into adulthood, whatever your age is in adulthood, but once you sort of pass like a certain threshold, it's not as easy to be learning the things, to come upon new things and to want to do them and to fit them into your schedule and to say, I want to do this. And this is something that is important to me to learn how to do and to get pretty good at, because you got to put in the time. You got to find the time to do the thing. And I think sports, any kind of like physical, something like that is both fun and also reminds you of being a kid again, like learning a new thing and like figuring it out. And it's very joyful, right? It's like, it's the fun in the movement, and you get the satisfaction and pleasure of doing that. I think it's awesome. I love seeing your face when you're talking about, your how you came to be a rower, because you're just like, this is how did I even get here? Right. And yet you're proud of it, and it feels, and you feel good about it.
Yeah. And by the way, the toughest part about rowing is that 5 minutes in a row machine feels like 5 hours.
Yes, it's true.
It's like you'll look down and you'll go.
That's what I was saying. And it hurts. It hurts.
But look, even before I got on the water, I learned a lot by watching videos. Like I became obsessed with watching coaches talk about rowing, because being an exercise physiologist, I was like, okay, I know I'm doing things wrong, because in order to go fast, my stroke rate has to be at 30, right?
Right.
Now my stroke rate barely reaches 20. Like I'll stroke at 18 and 19.
Yeah.
And, because and I had to learn about the drag. Where do you put the drag? Why does the drag matter? What's the actual drag on the water, which is about 130, right? So you want that same drag to be that on the machine. So now you want your legs to work with that.
Yeah. And to know what it feels like on the water as the boat is like, that catch. And then especially if you row with other people, when it all, you're in a boat with all these, these other rowers, and if you're not quite on the right timing, you kind of feel it, right? Even if it's like pretty good, but when you get that sweet synchronicity, you're just like, oh, that was the one. And it's like so magical. I love that so much.
Yeah. And, one of the things that happened to me was it was 12 sessions, and oddly, most of the people out there, I'm not sure how they ended up in a rowing class, but they just decided, hey, I don't know if they knew where they were heading, right? Because they had no concept of what rowing was. I mean, before I went out there, I watched a bunch of videos. It's like, how do you get into the boat? Do you work? All this kind of stuff, right? So
that is important.
because they don't tell you. So you're out there on a boat with a bunch of people that can't row. And the way they do it at first, as you know, is they have half the people hold the boat with their oars while the other half are rowing, right? And nobody could get in sync and nobody could get in time. It was like the Bad News Bears. Everyone's running around. It's like they were trying to hurt lizards in a boat, right? And I think Riley and company saw that I wanted to really do this, right? So one of the coaches says, we row on Sunday. Would you like to come in the boat with us? I was like, yes, ma'am. Just tell me when, right? And I was nervous because now I'm with collegiate rowers, and it's like, oh, geez, now they got to put up with me. I'm the odd man out, right? But once you get in there and you follow the person in front of you, and you start doing it, they can quickly coach someone like me to do it.
Yeah.
And then that boat starts flying underneath you.
Oh, it feels it's such a beautiful feeling. Like
Oh,
I get chills just thinking about it.
yeah, it's a great feeling, and it's just rolling across the water. Listen, folks, I don't want to keep Bonnie forever. I could tell you so much more about this book. She gets into, I'm going to be on boats for the rest of the day. She gets into jumping rope and what that means. She gets into the Dinnie Stones and lifting these things and what that means and exactly how muscle works, right? And look, this is fortuitous that this book came out right at the time that I'm getting ready to put out 3 workout programs. I didn't know that Bonnie was writing this book, but I have 3 workout programs that's going to be out within a month, right? And they're all strength training exercises, right? I have a 6-day routine, a 4-day, and a 2-day routine. Bonnie, I'm going to send you all 3 routines. You got to check them out.
Woot woot. I will.
You got to go get this book because there's no way we could do it justice in an hour. It's just impossible. You have to read this. It's in the Vinnie Book Club. So go to VinnieTortorich.com, click through the banner, or you can go straight to Amazon, but go through VinnieTortorich.com first. Click through that banner. You're going to see the book is going to be front and center. And when you click on that, it will take you right to Amazon, and I will get a taste also. I will tell you this. Bonnie did what I did. If you get the Audible book, she reads the book, and she does an excellent job. So that beautiful velvety voice you've been hearing throughout the whole podcast on Bonnie, you get to hear that for almost 7 hours in this book. I did listen to the book, and she does an incredible job. So go check out everything that Bonnie Tsui is doing. Bonnie, anything you want to add before we go to music here?
I just want to say thank you, Vinnie. You're a peach.
Stop it. Stop it. By the way, can I just ask you this really fast? Have you ever read the book Confessions of a Bodybuilder by Samuel Wilson? I think it's
I have not.
Incredible book. Incredible book. But folks, before you read that, go read On Muscle. And did all the ads, yeah. So on behalf of Bonnie Tsui, my name is Vinnie Tortorich. Put life into living and do it with a little more of Molly Hatchet.